this is a good time to talk about the North Koreans and the possibility of them sending over troops. Now, this is a report from the United States talking about it. Putin would use North Korean troops as cannon fodder, U.S. claims. Kremlin chief and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un signed a strategic partnership treaty, deepening military cooperation in June. If Pyongyang ever decides to send troops to fight for Russia and Ukraine, its forces would be used as cannon fodder, Pentagon Press Secretary General Pat Ryder said at a briefing Tuesday. If I were North Korean military personnel management, I'd be questioning my choice of sending my forces to be cannon fodder in an illegal war against Ukraine. We've seen the kind of casualty that Russian forces sustain.
Has occurred.
Frugal has donated $5. I don't trust one man to make a prediction. Is Biden going to win?
Yes. Thank you for $5. Where was I? Russia's military strategy during the war has involved using its superior numbers of soldiers to overwhelm Ukraine. While it suffered heavy losses during its illegal invasion, has been able to replace frontline troops quickly. Earlier this month, Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un signed a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty that commits both countries to provide military assistance to each other if attacked. Now, this military assistance was never specified, so people kept it very vague. If it just meant troops being sent over, if it meant weapons being sent over, whatever it meant. According to the pact, in the case any of the two sides is put in a state of war by foreign invasion, the other side shall provide military and other assistance with all means in its possession without delay. The treaty doesn't mention the current war, and there's no immediate indication as yet that the North Koreans will send troops, but Pyongyang does plan to send its military engineering unit to the occupied territories of Ukraine to undertake rebuilding work, Reuters reported, citing South Korean TV Chosun channel. The troops being sent to Ukraine will likely serve as overseas workers to earn hard cash for North Korea, like we talked about earlier. The troops go overseas to earn harsh cash for the North Korean regime, which they then use to evade sanctions, and then the workers get a very slim percentage of that income that they work for, where the economy is strangled by international sanctions. So, the North Koreans have already provided Russia with ballistic missiles, which have been fired at Ukraine. The North Koreans have already provided Russia with shells, which have been fired at Ukraine. This all exists while the South Koreans, technically on the books, cannot send any weapons to Ukraine. Now, that doesn't mean they haven't sent anything to Ukraine. They actually did send weapons to Ukraine indirectly through the United States. It was taken from South Korean reserves, sent to the United States. It's technically legal to send it over them since they're not a nation state at war and they're a South Korean ally. And then the United States simply sent 500,000 shells out of its reserves, which was just recently replenished by South Korean reserves, over to the Ukrainians. So they've been able to send over 500,000 155 millimeter NATO standard shells through America to Ukraine. So that's what the South Koreans have done. But the North Koreans have given the Russians ballistic missiles. They've given them a lot of shells to help replenish their war effort. And they've recently signed a joint treaty that means that they're going to have deeper integration. And the Russians even suggested that they would help these North Koreans with ballistic targeting, meaning that they would help them get more accurate weapons at longer distances, which really frightened, say, the South Koreans and the Japanese and other Asian allies of the United States and the United States itself at the prospect of the North Koreans not only having nuclear weapons, but having even more accurate nuclear weapons. And that's only one way that they could help them. They can help them, like we already said in this article, with the cash transfers. They could help them with other technology improvements for their military. They could help them with just general sanctions avoidance and allowing them to import other Russian goods that they haven't been able to get from the West, helping them avoid sanctions in response to their nuclear proliferation. Generally supporting the North Koreans in a way that is certainly not going to be beneficial to South Korean security interests. And so the South Koreans, in response to this, said, we will send support to Ukraine in accordance with North Korean support sent to Russia. And it put Russia in a difficult position. And the difficult position is, well, if they go forward with working with the North Koreans and importing all this stuff, then Ukraine is going to have South Korea change its laws so it can directly export weapons to them and then get more South Korean support. While South Korea is the second largest arms manufacturer in the world and produces a lot of 155 millimeter shells, which is a shell caliber the Ukrainians need, and produce a lot of air defense systems, which is another capability that the Ukrainians really, really need right now. So it's not something that'd be great for the Russians. But if the Russians then reject North Korean support, then they're not going to get the shells, they're not going to get the ballistic missiles, they're not going to get the laborers when they have a labor shortage that they need to deal with. They're not going to get any of the support from the North Koreans when it comes to personnel, but at least the South Koreans aren't supporting them. It's a lose-lose scenario for the Russians, given the applied notion, which is that the South Koreans will actually deliver on their word and it's not a bluff. But I think this is an example of the Russians testing the West and the North Koreans testing the West to see what they would do under the announcement that North Koreans engineering troops are going to Russia to work in occupied territory. At the same time, where the West is talking about, well, are we going to send air defense troops to Ukraine? Are we going to send border patrol troops to Ukraine? Are we even just going to send training troops to Ukraine? Should we send training troops to Ukraine? Olaf Scholz is saying, no, 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 no. The United States is saying, no, 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 no. Others, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, they're a little bit more on the fence. Some are even suggesting that they'd be willing to send. And the French government of Emmanuel Macron has been a lot more confident in those assertions of sending troops. Now, not that the opposition has. Marie Le Pen's party, the National Front, wants to reel in support for Ukraine, not only because of Marie Le Pen's Putinist history, but maybe their more realist foreign policy framework, Mearsheimian, if you want to call it that. Point is, though, while the West is discussing sending troops to Ukraine of a training capacity, the North Koreans, after sending artillery shells, ballistic missiles, is now on the way to sending troops to occupied Ukraine. And you can call it what you want, engineering units, this, that. If they are North Korean soldiers, even if they have rulers and shovels and hammers and not rifles, they are still North Korean soldiers being sent to Ukraine to help embolden and strengthen the occupation. And that would necessitate a response from the West. That would necessitate a response from Washington, and it should necessitate a response from Seoul, from the South Koreans. Now, one thing that, by the way, does this mean that this is a natural one-to-one, that now there's engineering troops? We're going to have Pyongyang stormtroopers charging at Chasiv Yar, Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka, Kupiansk, or any of these other cities. No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. Again, I think in a large way, this is testing Western resolve, seeing if the West is really willing to put foreign uniforms in Ukraine in the same way that maybe the North Koreans, who might have a lot less disregard for public sentiment on the war and what they think about the war, is willing to.
Frugal has donated $5. How could Putin have recognized this as a win for him?
Thank you for the $5. Well, it could be him calling the West bluff. It could be, I think the North Koreans are willing to lose troops in Ukraine. Are the French really willing to lose troops in Ukraine? Are the Estonians, Latvian, Lithuanians? Are the Europeans, the nauseous, limp wristed European sentiment is going to be able to stop? It could be a calling of the bluff. It could be that Putin has reached these crossroads and he would rather try to juice the North Koreans for everything he could than take into consideration what the South Koreans are going to do. If he's already started down this path, if he backs off now, would that just incentivize other countries using this as a mechanism to try to back Russia off of more aggressive expansions of the war? Would this remove a lot of Putin's ability to grab levers to escalate the war on his side? Because all what you want, this is a Russian escalation of the war. They're taking North Korean shells, North Korean missiles, and now they're taking North Korean troops. They're taking foreign troops into occupied territory to build defenses to help them develop the occupation. The occupation, they're moving hundreds of thousands of illegal Russian settlers in to also help further their colonial project, right? This is an escalation and expansion of the war on the Russian side. We need to talk about it in those terms more so we can talk about how to deal with it. Because if we don't talk about it as an expansion of the war and we just kind of look at it as an abstract event and we're just looking at history passively, then there's not like a policy solution. There's no response to it. And you just let the Russians expand the war and we sit on our hands and do nothing. And after 6 months of sitting on our hands and doing nothing, I don't want to do that anymore.
Rosetum 287 has donated $5. Trump would have stopped Little Rocket Man. He invented world peace.
That is true. Trump did invent world peace. That is true. I believe he has the patent in crayon on his desk. True. That's very true. Now, what could the West do in response to this to make the North Koreans back off? Now, I don't like, so I appreciate diplomatic transparency to a certain degree. And so a simple, like I remember back in the day, there were certain like nuclear theorists that proposed publishing a list from the United States. I think it was certain nuclear scientists proposed publishing a list that would have exact math. For if you blow up one of our cities, we'll blow up 3 of yours. Having an exact equation for how many nuclear weapons you would use in response. So the other side could be like, oh, they have resolve. We don't want to mess with them. And there's that sort of transparency. Now, obviously, we're not dealing with nuclear weapons here. We're dealing with North Korean and Russian escalation of the war. But I guess you could imagine some scenario where it's like, oh, well, for every 100 North Korean laborers, we send 50,000 shells. We send 100,000 shells. Or there's some ratio to that. So there could be a direct equation Putin could look at to be like, every time I increase North Korean support of the war, I will be increasing South Korean support. It doesn't need to be exactly that ratio. It doesn't even need to be the shells. It could be the air defense system. It could be other contractors. But there's some way for the South Koreans to try to use the lever here, try to make Putin back down or make sure that he feels the impact of not backing down. Again, doesn't need to be that exact math, but something similar so the South Koreans can show that they have resolve on this and they are not excited about the fact that the North Koreans are going to be supported by the Russians, and then the North Koreans only have one real war aim if they were to ever go to war again, and that is pushing south. So obviously, if your main goal as a state is to stop that from happening, and the Russians are compromising that goal, and the main goal of every state is survival, it makes sense that the South Koreans should and would make them feel the consequences of not backing down off of this plan. Now, that's what the South Koreans can do, but it's not just the South Koreans that can react to this. Because, again, like we talked about earlier, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, there's a bunch of states that could announce bilateral treaties. It doesn't need to be multilateral. And some people need to realize this, because I feel like sometimes we kind of scale it up. Oh, it needs to be this EU initiative. It needs to be the NATO initiative. And I understand, like, if you make it multilateral, then you can get more countries involved, more resources, more this. But a lot of times what Ukraine needs is somebody to shatter the glass ceiling of violence. No, not the glass ceiling of sexism, the glass ceiling of violence. And in this case, that glass ceiling is, well, nobody has sent foreign troops to Ukraine before. Remember when there was no Western tanks to Ukraine, and so there was this big, like, oh, should we really send Western tanks to Ukraine? Could the Abrams perform there? And I don't know, that would be an escalation of the war. And then the British just said, screw it, Crusader tanks, here you go. And then after that happened, then came the Abrams, then came the Leopards, then came all these other tanks on top of it. I mean, even from states like Germany, which used to be fully down on the Russian boot, licky. So that can show a shift by one state taking decisive action. This also happened with the British Storm Shadows. The British were the first to send long-range munitions, Storm Shadows, to Ukraine. And after they sent the Storm Shadows to Ukraine, what happened afterwards? Other countries sent long-range weapons. I know that the Russians, the French have now sent over the Hammer bombs, which they're sending over 50 a month, and those have been doing good damage. The United States sent over ATACMS.
Morally corrupt, bankrupt man.
And even if those ATACMS still cannot be used in Russia proper, they are doing immense damage to air defense systems and radars in Crimea, and to training grounds in Luhansk and other places within Ukraine itself, even though I still think that the policy of restricting ATACMS strikes from within Russia makes no policy sense. It makes sense to crawl forward escalation-wise. It makes no sense for this, as we are standing right now, to be the state of affairs when it comes to ATACMS or strikes on Russian air bases that are bombing Ukraine. If the policy is Ukraine can strike Russia over the border, if those units are being used to strike Ukraine or attack Ukraine, why would that not naturally extend to the air bases that are bombing Ukraine? Makes no sense, makes no sense, makes no sense. But the United States, outside of Europe possibly being like the Estonians sending over training troops, the French sending over training troops, et cetera, breaking the glass ceiling and being like, oh, maybe next it won't be training troops. Maybe next it'll be air defense. Maybe next it'll be border patrol to free up more soldiers to fight on the front against the Russian advances. Now, that's what Europe can do. That's what South Korea could do. And again, Europe can do other things as well in response. Like, oh, it could just be like, fine, we're going to send more artillery shells. We're going to send more of this, more of that. Just make it clear that it's a consequence and verbally tie it to what the North Koreans are doing. But there's another thing that could be approved, and that is the Biden administration is considering allowing American military contractors to deploy to Ukraine. So up to recently, this was not something that was being considered, but American military contractors could be making a pretty penny in Ukraine. And compared to other countries that we've allowed them to operate in, they might even be safer. In some ways, maybe not, but if they're given strong enough air defense and they're working in Western Ukraine doing training or whatever it might be, air defense work, maybe they would be safer than, say, how they were in Iraq or Afghanistan. Point is, though, this would mean American contractors working in Ukraine so that a lot of these pieces of equipment that have to be moved into the West to be repaired could more easily be moved into, say, Lviv or Ivano-Frankivsk or Kiev, repaired there and sent back to the front sooner, which could help the Leopards, could help the Abrams. If we're going to have contractors working over there, could be working on any of the Abrams, could be working on the Patriot systems, could be working on any number of American howitzers, the M777, the 105 millimeter guns, any of those. The Biden administration is moving towards lifting a de facto ban on American military contractors deploying to Ukraine or U.S. officials, with the matter told CNN, to help the country's military maintain and repair U.S.-provided weapon systems. The change would mark another significant shift in the Biden administration's Ukraine policy, as the U.S. look for ways to give Ukraine's military an upper hand against Russia. The policy is still being worked on by administration officials. It has not received final sign-off yet from President Joe Biden. We have not made any decisions, and discussion of this is premature, said one administration official. The president is absolutely firm they will not be sending U.S. troops to Ukraine.
Today I explained tariffs to my partner. He was very upset. He believed Don got money from China, not a charge to American buyers 2 times basically. And tomorrow is my birthday.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say, like, hey, it's hard, I'm sorry to tell you this, but when Trump did the steel tariffs, all that meant is all the companies that use steel just charged you more. Sorry to tell you that. I mean, hey, I guess some steel companies, got in America got some money, but also the companies that have to use steel lost some money. And when you talk about net employment gains, that's not something you can really claim super hard. Anyway, thank you for the $10. I appreciate that. But yeah, tariffs is a difficult conversation. It's strained many a relationship. Once approved, the change would be likely enacted this year, officials said, and would allow the Pentagon to provide contracts to American companies for work inside Ukraine for the first time since Russia invaded. Officials said they hope it will speed up the maintenance and repairs of weapon systems being used by the Ukrainian military. Over the last 2 years, Biden has insisted that all Americans, and particularly U.S. troops, stay far away from the Ukrainian front lines. The White House has been determined to limit both the danger to Americans and the perception, particularly by Russia, that the U.S. military is engaged in combat there.
Immoral,
morally corrupt, bankrupt man. And again, we're going to be doing that. We're going to be trying our hardest to maintain this perception while the North Koreans are like, I mean, they're not sending stormtroopers over, but they're not too far from sending stormtroopers. It's only a hop, skip, and a jump away. Only a hop, skip, and a jump away. Thank you, Popeye, for the tier 1 sub. I loved your cartoon. As a result, U.S. provided military equipment has sustained significant damage in combat and has been transported out of the country to Poland, Romania, or other NATO countries for repairs, a process which takes time. U.S. troops are also available to help the Ukrainians with more routine maintenance and logistics, but only from afar via video chat or secure phone, an arrangement that has come with inherent limitations since U.S. troops and contractors are not able to work directly on the systems. By the way, if you're somebody who cares about anti-corruption when it comes to this war, and I mean genuinely, and it's not just using it as a virtue signal in order to just try to undercut all support to Ukraine, having U.S. contractors on the ground inspecting Ukrainian logistics would be another pair of eyes. Administration officials begin to seriously reconsider those restrictions over the last several months, officials said, as Russia continued to make gains on the battlefield and U.S. funding for Ukraine stalled in Congress, allowing experienced U.S. government-funded American contractors to maintain a presence in Ukraine means they would be able to help fix damaged, high-value equipment much faster, officials said. One advanced system that officials say will likely require regular maintenance is the F-16 fighter jet, which Ukraine is set to receive later this year. Companies bidding for the contracts would be required to develop robust risk mitigation plans to mitigate their threats to their employees. The discussions follows a series of decisions the U.S. has made in recent months to try to help Ukraine beat back the Russians. Again, there's certain areas that could be more aggressive in, allowing ATACMS strikes within Russia, allowing the Ukrainians to strike air bases deeper within Russia that could do real damage to the Russian air attack on Ukraine, and in principle would still be within the bounds of why the Russians allowed the Ukrainians to strike into Russia using American-provided weapons in the first place. But this would be another step in that direction and would be a logical response to the information that North Korean engineers are being sent to occupied territories. And we're not talking about sending American troops to illegally occupied territories. We're talking about sending American contractors to a country after a contract has been signed and they're making money, so they're profiting, right? So they're risking their lives for money. They've signed the deal, serve under the flag of the great green dollar, that stuff. But it would mean faster repair times and a response to the North Koreans allowing these contractors, not their contractors, they don't call them contractors, allowing their engineers to move into Ukraine and work. Whether or not the Biden administration is actually going to move forward with this, whether or not the North Korean move is going to have an impact on this, or the Biden administration would find some other response for it, I do not know. But the ball is in the West Court. Dylan confirmed for Based. Popeye watcher. Dude, I loved Popeye. I loved Popeye so much as a kid that I broke the VHS watching Popeye.